G'day, I'm an Australian and I was born here in Queensland, and my first job was an apprentice electrician in the railways, so I know the value of an apprenticeship. I've been asked to be the face of this not for sale campaign, and I'm delighted because there's a whisper going round that the LNP government is seeking a mandate to sell off the electricity assets in this state. Not as far as I'm concerned. That's just not on. Privatisation will be in the public interest. That's what we're told. It will mean cheaper prices and it will mean better services. Can you think of one instance where a public asset has been sold off and the prices have come down and the services improved? Think about Telstra. What about South Australia and Victoria? South Australia, I believe, has the highest electricity costs of any country in the world simply because they privatised it and sold it off. I mentioned my first job as an apprentice electrician. Part of my wages then went towards paying for this infrastructure that has now been contemplated being sold off to some multinational company. That's not what I had money taken out of my wages for. And I'm sure that there are generations out there who feel the same way that I do, that the only responsible way to deal with public assets is to keep them in the public hands and be managed by the governments that we elect. Therein lies a danger at the moment, because you need to take responsibility for the fact that the LNP government could be contemplating the sale of these assets. We need you to tell them that's not on. I urge you to have a look at the website that's been set up, the Not For Sale website. See what Peter and Trevor have had to say, so that you can be informed and make a decision in your interest. You, the members of the public. Privatisation of public assets? You'd have to be a mug.
Welcome to the Not For Sale website, a website set up by the Electrical Trades Union and concerned community members like Tony Barry, a long-term Australian actor and long-term community campaigner. Privatisation is being talked about in the Queensland government. They're looking at selling our assets. We've got no ifs or buts about that. They keep talking about a mandate before the next election. We don't think they're going to wait till the next election. That's why this campaign site's up and running. There's a lot of facts and figures on this website, fact sheets you can download and show to your friends. Research that's been done, extensive research into the pricing of electricity overseas and in this country. Have a look at the South Australian experience, where South Australia now has a dubious honour of having the most expensive electricity in the world, following its privatisation some years ago. Anyone that's had any experience with privatisation, the rail privatisations before, the wharves, those telecom, Qantas, would remember that there's not too many good news stories that come out of them. Not too many good news stories for consumers, plenty for big business, plenty for shareholders, not so much for workers like you and I. We urge you to get involved. We urge you to get informed, number one. And there's plenty of information on this site. We've taken the time to sit down and actually put some fact sheets together, some audio that you need to have a listen to. And also don't forget to register your name and email address and other details on the community site so we can get information out to you about rallies, special events, and your involvement can help stop this privatisation by the Newman government. You've probably all heard about the benefits to consumers of privatisation. You've seen about Telstra, how it was going to be so much better for people. You've seen what's happened with Qantas, it was always going to be better for people. Have a look what's happened to our railways of recent times and our electricity retailers, which have been privatised for some years now. We were told in that scenario that we're going to have 10% cuts in our power bills. The next year, prices went up by 10% and have been going up ever since. Have a look at how privatisation across the Western world has worked. Our friends in Victoria and South Australia have had some experience with this over recent years. South Australia was leased on a 99-year lease to an overseas buyer. They've now got the dubious honour of having the most expensive electricity prices in the world. Do we want that for Queensland? Have a look at our figures on the website. Have a look at the fact sheets we've put together to compare Queensland to the rest of Australia. We do pretty well, and this is in government hands. We don't want this to go off to private enterprise. There's no way we can let that happen. Most of you'd remember the Anna Bligh government's privatisations recently, before the last state election. This union proudly stood up and said, this is going to be bad for Queenslanders, it's going to be bad for consumers, rail passenger services, the whole lot. Unfortunately, we were 100% correct. I think we're going to be correct on this one too if it's allowed to go ahead. Have a think about what the future holds for electricity privatisation. Every time there's a cyclone or a major flood or a major storm, our members, proud Energex Ergon Powerlink workers, are out there in the mud and the blood and the booze, fixing up your power. They don't expect accolades for it, it's their job, but they enjoy doing it and they enjoy maintaining, and they're very proud of the Queensland electricity network. Will a private company have the same focus? Will its workers be as motivated by community interest? We leave that question for you to ponder, but we don't think so.
The difference with government-owned corporations is that they're owned by shareholding ministers who administer the shares on behalf of the Queensland community. The Queensland community has a say in how those corporations are run, in the fact that they get to vote for those politicians. So government-owned corporations are owned by you, the people. Private enterprise is usually owned by overseas investors, interstate investors, and rich people like Clive Palmer and Gina Reinhardt, not by you, Queenslanders. What it boils down to for me is that government-owned corporations are interested in essential services. Private companies are interested in profits. Which do you want? Do you want essential services, electricity to your home, or do you want to see multinationals making huge profits? For example, Ergon Energy, Energex and Powerlink returned a profit to the shareholding ministers in the order of $690 million in the last financial year. That money goes to consolidated revenue to be spent on schools, roads, playgrounds for our kids. If these government-owned corporations are sold into private hands, where do these profits go? Who's going to pay for this important infrastructure spending?
Many of you remember the summer storms of 2004-2005 when the electricity networks, particularly in the southeast, fell apart and people were 4 or 5 days without power. Our union campaigned very strongly to make sure we got maintenance levels back to where they needed to be. We campaigned very strongly to get additional workers into the workforce to try and maintain our network, which had been badly let down for 25 years. You try driving your car for 100,000 kilometres without doing a service on it and see what happens to it. That's what the Queensland network was like in 2004-2005. The recent cuts by the Newman government to maintenance levels, though, will see that change. In 5, 10, 15 years' time, you're going to see the same things again. People going without power for long periods of time. Response times under private companies come into it as well when it's sold. Response times in Victoria are pretty appalling. The Black Saturday bushfires down in Victoria, through the Royal Commission, a lot of that's been blamed on lack of maintenance in the Victorian network. You can see a similar thing happening here, I can tell you, and we need to stand up for this because it's our network, it's our consumers that use it, and it's our lives at risk if it's not maintained properly.
Another great advantage is the investment by government-owned corporations into research and innovation. If you go to our website, you'll find some links to some important innovative ideas around public safety and things like tariffs, which allow you to get cheaper electricity. If these corporations are privatised, will they continue to invest in research and innovation, or will profit prevail and we just go to the cheaper alternatives? There are clear signs that the LNP government has already started the privatisation process. We're already seeing major job axes going through Ergon and Energex. What we've seen in the regional areas is reductions of apprentice numbers in the order of 54 apprenticeships. 54 Queensland kids that aren't going to get a start in the electricity industry. We've seen in this first phase announcements of close to 500 or just over 500 regional jobs lost from Ergon Energy. Further signs of privatisation are becoming evident in the generation sector. We're starting to see this government mothballing generation capacity within Queensland. Electricity is a commodity like any other. When commodities become scarce, the price goes up.
Public assets mean that these assets belong to you. So I urge you, in the interest of keeping these public assets in public hands, you have a look around the website that's been comprehensively planned so that you get to see all the information that Peter and Trevor have mentioned earlier, and you can cruise through that yourself, inform yourself, and then make a decision. Is it in your interest to have public assets kept in the hands of the public and managed by the government? Or is it in your interest to have public assets sold off to a multinational whose only commitment is to their shareholders? And you may not be one of them. Privatisation of public assets? Not on.